thank you so much for watching the presidential address with Atang Swartbooi. Please do not forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And tell your friends to do the same, because reciprocation is important. And as we are bringing in the best, you must also reciprocate the energy. Please and thank you. So, Tsehofatsophule case, for those of you that don't remember it, it's that woman who was hung from a tree after being killed, right? So, her killer, Mr. Shoba, is alleging that he was trying to protect his partner from finding out about the whole issue, because his partner was going through stresses of dealing with her mother's death as a result of cancer. A whole story. More is to be seen as to what happens. In other news, Mr. Julius Malema is at it again, guys. Take a look for yourself.
You also want me to interpret the language you hear?
Yes, just so we're clear. What are you saying?
Kiss the Boer, kiss the farmer. I thought it's English.
It is?
Yes.
And what does that mean?
It means kiss.
Kiss how?
Mwah.
Juju. I must admit, this guy is very funny. Think about it. First he says kill the Boer, then he changes the song to kiss the Boer, then he... where does he stand? We don't know. Be that as it may. In other news, guys, so in Randfontein, in a Hoërskool called Hoërskool Jan Viljoen, a very serious altercation occurred. White people were fighting against black people for racial issues. So much so that it involved the head boy slapping the deputy head girl. Guys, we are here to talk about the intersectionality between racism and gender-based violence. This is the presidential address with Atang Swartbooi. Let's take it. Hello everyone, my name is Atang Swartbooi, your host for this absolutely jam-packed and magnificent show called The Presidential Address with Atang Swartbooi, where we'll be dealing with societal justice issues affecting our people. And what better way to do it than every single second week, fairly. We're going to have our own family meeting where we'll be addressing some of the issues that we are encountering in South Africa and sometimes the world at large. We are now going to the segment called Family Meeting. I thank you. So this is Family Meeting. I won't get over that, the whole name. I just think it's weird. As you can see, I'm not alone. I'm joined here by Justin Swart, who is going to be helping me delve and really dig deeper into social justice issues affecting our people. Why am I jumping this? But okay, so welcome to this segment. I think we're gonna learn a lot. I am very willing to learn about whatever is going to be talked about. The topic and the theme for today is going to be the intersectionality between racism and gender-based violence. Okay, Justin, I want to ask you. I wanted to break it down, but before we do that, man, I want to ask the public what they think intersectionality means, because I think it's a very important concept to cover before we go into racism and gender-based violence itself. James, man, before we go to the viewers, I just need my drink. Please just make sure that you give us the drinks. So, this is what the people are saying about what they think intersectionality means.
Not in front of the camera, James.
Okay, we are here with Togozo. So I'm just going to ask you a simple question. All I need to do is, you just need to answer. What is intersectionality?
I don't know. To be honest, what is intersectionality?
Just try.
Try.
Just try.
I'm going to get a wrong answer for this.
Doesn't matter, there's no right or wrong answer. Come on, at least you try.
Intersectionality. Is this in relation to that show, Intersections?
No, it's related to gender-based violence.
Gender-based violence. Then I am no way.
Okay. Intersectionality is when both social and political ideas form what your view of discrimination is.
So basically it's like you think something is right just because of your views, basically.
Okay, so we are here with
Ivan Knute.
Ivan.
I coach Jason Jenkins, my little shop underneath Texas.
Follow guys, come here. So I'm just going to ask you one question.
Sure.
I just need to answer.
Sure.
What is intersectionality?
I don't know.
So we are here with Dorothy. Okay, I'm just going to ask you one question. All I need you to do is just give me an answer.
Okay.
What is intersectionality?
Fuck out of here! Okay, I think maybe it's when. Okay, I'm not really sure.
Just give it a try. Okay. Just shoot.
Okay, I think what?
Intersectionality.
Is it when you have different partners?
No. Okay, so we are here today with John. John, I'm just gonna ask you a simple question. I want you to give me your definition.
Most definitely.
What is intersectionality? This guy, bro. To be honest, I've never heard of that. Just.
All right. So now that we've heard all those crazy responses, right? I think y'all must have met James because he came up with his own definition for the show. We asked him to give us a definition for what intersectionality might mean, and did he not come up with a definition? Let me read it to you guys. I'm not gonna memorize this. That's gonna be like silly. So let me read it to you. Intersectionality is defined as the interconnected nature of social categorization, such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to a given individual group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination. First of all, how are you after hearing that?
Can I have the English version?
That was like crazy. But could you tell us, maybe give us like a bit of insight as to what intersectionality means in layman's terms?
Well, I think we all can agree that there is no shortage of discrimination in the world. And each discrimination is just as bad as the other ones. But when it becomes really bad is when these discriminations start to overlap. There is situations where one group's discrimination and another group's discrimination kind of collide with each other because one person can form part of a group that is in both of these discriminated groups. And that is when we start to look at and scrutinize, does these discriminations make each other worse? And that is what we will be looking at.
That's very interesting because James, that was a much better way of explaining intersectionality, my friend.
Sorry, sir.
But be that as it may, thank you so much, Justin, for that simplification of that definition. But now I want to have like a question, right? Because like we know now, we're going to talk about the intersectionality between racism and gender-based violence. That's what we're going to be focusing on. And I'm going to put like a scenario forward, a very realistic one, something that's happening in South Africa right now. Virtual Jan for you in Randfontein. We all know what's happening there. We did mention it earlier, but I want to re-emphasize that whole altercation. And for those of you who don't know what happened, right? So apparently, the head boy went to the black students, the white head boy went to the black students to tell them that they're not allowed to play amapiano, right? That's how we understand the story. And then the black deputy head girl went to address the issues with the white head boy, which led to the white head boy slapping the black head girl, or the black deputy head girl. Now, why I'm asking this is because it's very particularly important that we address the issue of intersectionality. Because one, we are dealing with a black person, two, we are dealing with a woman. Three, we are dealing with a white person, and four, we are dealing with a man. And I want to ask you, how do you see it? Do you see this as gender-based violence or racism as a point of departure?
I think this is where it becomes very important to take a look at the facts that surround it. Did he hit her because she's black? Did he hit her because she's a woman? Or did he hit her because she's a black woman? And that is where we have to start to look at where does this issue come from and could it be related to each other?
Can it like go vice versa though? Like I know, for example, it's very easy to go like from racism to gender-based violence, and let me explain that, why I mean that. It's because like going back to like the apartheid era, like our parents or our grandparents were like exposed to that very toxic, volatile, violent atmosphere, right? And when they go back home, the only thing they could control was the family. And if they were exposed to that kind of environment at work and they come back home, well, I think the frustrations are going to be, the outlet of that frustration is going to be upon the family. So you can kind of go from racism to gender-based violence, and meaning racism can cause gender-based violence. But then is it possible to go from gender-based violence to racism?
I do think it's always possible, because there are a lot of societal views and pressures out there, and having a view of a certain group that partake in gender-based violence, I don't know how to word it better, but could make it that another racial group could see that group otherwise, and kind of in certain circumstances. I don't think it's very general, but it can happen that gender-based violence could create further racism, in the sense that if it is, for instance, prominent, as you say, in the black community because of that racism, that they are more likely to, or not more likely, it occurs a lot more because of the racism, and that becomes more prevalent in the community, then that could lead to more racism, leading to more gender-based violence, and it becomes a vicious snowball effect.
Which is harder to address though. Like I'm a gender-based violence activist. Like a premise for me is like I am a gender-based violence activist. Hello, I'm Atang. Which is harder to address though. I always felt like racism is kind of harder to address because racism is like very abstract. Whereas with gender-based violence, you can actually see it. Like you can see someone hitting someone or someone abusing someone. With racism, we all know that subtle racism that everyone goes through. Which one is it? Like, how do you even start to address racism?
I don't think it's fair to assume that one is harder than the other, because it's not really harder than the other, it just requires different things. I mean, even gender-based violence is not always easy to see, because women or men that go through gender-based violence don't always show it to the world, because it becomes a point of shame for them. They feel it's their fault, so they will hide it from the outside community. So you don't know if someone you know is going through gender-based violence, just like you don't know if someone you know is going through racism issues. So it's not really that one is easier, it's just we need to find different solutions to it.
Coming back to the inextricable intertwinedness, if I can put it like that, of racism and gender-based violence, and I go back to the scenario with the head boy and the deputy head girl, right? And you asked a very important question, 3 very important questions, but I'm going to speak about the last one. Did the head boy hit the deputy head girl because she's a black woman? How do you see any of that? Like, is it something that you think should be addressed from a point of view of gender-based violence or a point of view of racism?
I think we should address it through both. Like, you can ask further questions on that. The first being, would he have hit her if she was a white woman? The second question being, would he have hit him if he was a black man?
Sure.
So if those answers are answered, or those questions are answered, then you can start to see, is it more towards racism that this is leaning, or towards gender-based violence, or towards both simultaneously?
I think that's a very important thing to say, because I feel like it leans more towards the former than the latter. Like, I lived with white people a lot. Like, I'm not saying anything against white people, James. I'm not saying anything against white people. I'm just saying.
Thank you, sir.
I'm just saying that when they have this huge respect for white women, especially, like huge. But then there was a certain notable change whenever it involved like a black person. And I can speak to you about this because you're a white male. And it was particularly uncomfortable for me to address it. Like, for example, when we used to go to houses, they used to call the people who helped out by their names, and then a person who might be younger than a person, Bunny, right? So does it go to, do we have to find the balance between racism and gender-based violence, with the middle point being ultimately, we just need to have respect for each other?
Definitely. I think respect is a big part of the solution to this. Like, we will have to address both issues, and it will be very difficult to address them both at the same time. But I think with the correct kind of approach, it will be possible to kind of try to correct both of them in the same instance, in this specific case that we're looking at. But in general, I think it will be very difficult to try to solve 2 problems at once.
But then just like my question then, if for example, gender-based violence is as serious of an issue that you say it is, why did we have, for example, truth and reconciliation stuff back in the 90s, whereas in the early 2000s? Whereas with gender-based violence, we kind of just like talk about it and say we are going to invest 1 billion into it. Like, is it really like balancing act? Are the two 50-50, or is the focus placed more on racism because of the contextual nature of our country?
I think definitely people will focus a lot more on racism in South Africa because it is a lot more prominent and out there and open, whereas I think gender-based violence, like I said before, is very an internal struggle for the people that become victims of it. And I use victims in the loose sense because these people are an unfortunate, like their circumstances are not great. And they won't externalize that because it has become a point of shame for them. So I think that's why we focus on racism more than gender-based violence, because we see it. We don't see gender-based violence because it generally doesn't happen in the open, like in this case. Most of the
But then in
times,
this
yeah.
case it did. Like in
Yes.
Young For You, like,
Yes.
oh my God, they saw the guy hitting the woman.
But that is a special occasion. Like, I think that's 1 in 100 cases, or not even, like even more than that, would happen in the open, whereas most of them happen behind closed doors. People that you would never expect would partake in victimizing someone like that. Like, it's really, really, it can be anyone. And we won't know that until the person that is the victim comes forward.
So like independently sort out each issue on its own and then try to solve them as a collective. I just feel like that's best. Like, imagine trying to solve racism and gender-based violence all at once. Like, address the first issue and say, why did you hit the person? Okay, that's your point of departure. Is it because they are black or woman? If they say it's because for none of the reasons, then okay, we have a problem.
Yeah, but they will definitely say it's for none of the reasons because no one would ever admit to it being a racism or gender-based violence issue.
I have to ask you though, when you think about gender-based violence now, do you think it's a white person hitting the other person?
I think that is...
Yes or no?
Yes.
Do you think about white people hitting other white people? Like, for example, like household-wise, like if when someone says a case has been reported, now, are you immediately going to think it involves white people? That's the question.
Okay. I guess not.
Why not?
Because...
Are we at that level now where like black people are just like the pigs?
I wouldn't go that far. I just think it is at a point where media kind of portrays the bad part of society a lot more than it portrays the good side. And I think...
By society, you mean the black people?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, society as a whole.
Okay.
And bringing it to black people specifically, I think media wants us to believe that a certain group is bad and a certain group is good, for instance. And that is why they would kind of move towards showing more of a certain content for clickbait and sensation and so on. And that's why we as a society have been kind of brainwashed by the media to believe that gender-based violence is basically an exclusive thing of black communities.
Do you think like there's more lack of education within the black community than the white community? Let's say, for example, for argument's sake, we had black people not being such an overriding majority, and we had like 50-50 population. Highly not possible, haha. But overpopulation, we'll talk about it, don't worry. But do you think it would be possible to say we'd be able to identify white people being the perpetrators as well? Because at this point, like, I don't imagine white people hitting their women. Like, I just can't. Like, if I hear about the gender-based violence case and they decide to keep the names anonymous, you think black people immediately. Why? Like, that's my question. Like, why can't we think about, is it because, like, black people are just too much?
I don't think it's because it's too much. I think it's because it is overly populating the media that we're seeing. So you see, when you see the media and you see gender-based violence, it's going to be 9 out of 10 times a black person.
Do you think it's racist to have that mindset?
I think it might be,
Yeah.
but it's kind of a brainwashed racism kind of thing. Kind of we're coerced towards the racism instead of making our own minds up. We are kind of forced to think this way because that's all we see. That kind of you are what you take in. It's like what we see in the world is what we take into ourselves, is what we believe. And if you see something a lot more, you're going to believe it a lot more.
Is it Canadian feelings then withdrawn that the media is racist? Because you said that.
I think the media is definitely racist.
That's a very bold.
Like the media is not really. I would go as far as to say the media is not objective in what they show. Like if you think about it, what would the media show more? Something that will provoke a little bit of anger, or something that will provoke a lot of anger and get a lot of people reading this thing? Like they're definitely going to go for the sensation bit. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree. And I also think that like the more something gets normalized, the more it just has no relevance to people. And I think that gender-based violence, especially if you attach it and say, oh, why black people are more involved in it, like it's so normalized now. And I'm sorry to say this, but it is. And so there is still a huge issue. Because now the manner in which people are doing this is starting to get, like, it's very aggravated. And so I think most people, like, when they heard about the whole Yan Fu Yoon case, it was a shock. Because why? A white person did it. It's such a shock, right? But we can go into much detail about all of this. I'm not gonna, my producers are in my ear, telling me that we are wasting time. We are not wasting time, we are pressing here. But that ends and concludes this segment of the show. And I'm very glad that you stuck it out and listened to us dissect the issue of intersectionality between racism and gender-based violence. More to follow. Thank you. This is going to be a segment called Submission. So we'll be receiving questions from our general public. Our audience will be asking us any type of question relating to any social justice issue that they want to address, that they want us to address in our next episode. So we'll be discussing it and brainstorming those ideas right now and live with you watching us. Right now, James just sent us the questions, or he's sending us the questions one by one because like we need to keep this as fragile and as raw as possible. So, Justin, I am believing that you have the questions, so let's start.
James just sent me the question. Okay, so the first question is from We Stand Selena Gomez. So, it says, is the SONA in its current form still relevant?
SONA.
SONA.
State of Nation Address.
Yes.
I feel like we could do all of this in an email. I'm joking. Y'all were supposed to laugh. Okay. But
Sorry, sir.
to put it mildly though, like I feel like we are not addressing the state of the nation. Rather, it's like bragging about the small things that we're... Like, for example, the president literally came up and told us that he will be awarding people 350 rands for an extra year. That's not the state of the nation. That's like...
Send it in a tweet.
Dude, like, that's like following a recommendation from people to say, we are still poor, by the way, don't end it. So, in that regard, I don't think it's relevant anymore. I feel like we should change how it is, because there's no accountability taking place. Yeah, we have the debate happening afterwards, but like, is it really, we really just playing dress rehearsal every year of like promises? Okay, we're gonna do this next year. Okay, we're gonna do this next year. Instead of coming back and saying, here's what we did, here's what didn't work, here's what worked, here's what's gonna happen so that it works this time. Wabo. So that kind of like, that is the state of the nation address. So if I am going to address the intersectionality between gender-based violence and racism, I will say, here's what's the issue. Here's what happened in Yan Fu Yoon. Here's what we're going to do in order to prevent it happening next time. And by the next year comes, I'm going to have a report on where we are in regards to that. Every year we hear about different ideas. We never know what happened with their plans for land expropriation. We never know what happened, where they are. They never give us updates, which is supposed to be the whole crux of the whole Swana thing.
You know, I do agree with you, and I think in today's life, most of us are very busy. Like, I don't have time to watch a 7-hour thing. And it's not 7 hours, but it feels like it. Like, I think I haven't watched the State of the Nation in a long time. I just read the summary afterwards because that is just much more convenient and efficient. And I think if that is the state of things, shouldn't it just be an update list kind of thing that we can just quickly read through? Do we really need it to be a live thing?
Like, the other question is, what are they addressing? Like, I feel like we are prioritizing the wrong things at this point instead of prioritizing the fundamentals. And if we're not prioritizing the fundamentals right now, we won't be able to move for 20 years because we'll still be dealing with the things after the fundamentals. For example, gender-based violence and racism. We don't have any tangible system or program in place to deal with it. So it will keep being perpetuated. And I think it's very crucial that we understand that he has a very tough job in his hands. We come from a pandemic, but
it's definitely a very, very difficult position to be in. But I feel if an address like this leaves the people that watch it more confused than they were before, that's an issue, and that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that was a very good. Who was it from again? Just check who was it from. We stand
Selena Gomez.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Selena. Thank you. I really asked that. So let's go for the next question.
Okay.
James.
James, will you send it to me, please?
Oh, that's nice.
Did you say the next question? Let's look at the next question. I think it's a very cool thing, but we can do it next show.
Okay.
I don't know. We'll consider it.
Okay. The next question comes from Robert Downey is awesome. The question is, what is the role of men specifically in activism against gender-based violence? And I think this is a very personal matter for you, so let's get started.
Good. Okay. First of all, as a point of departure, I would like to say this. I'm going to be very serious now. We are not against women. So many times, men have been activists, but they've stopped being activists because when they start questioning some things, they are called to be defenders of the Not All Men movement. I think we have come to a point now where women need to realize that we have a role to play. And I think it's a realization that women have already. However, it's not been concretized, meaning there's no practice being done about it. I can go on Instagram Lives and I can go deliver my opinion, but I promise you, 90% of the time, I will be corrected on something I say instead of, I respect your opinion. But here's how this can be a problem. Why do you say this? Those are not the questions I'm asked. The first thing that comes to mind is, it's disgusting that you're thinking that way. Now, imagine if someone says that to a male activist. Do you really think will be inspiring or discouraging male activists? The former, very little. The latter, significant. Because we are actually trying to say to them, you are needed to not abuse women, but you are not needed in us trying to find a solution for it. I take this very personal because I had a whole Instagram chat about people, and it's crazy that James came up with James. Well done. But yeah, I just feel like women should accept that our intentions as male activists are very well intentioned. Instead of, are they doing this to benefit from something? Brother, I've been called on my TikTok videos simps, and for those of you who don't know, it's a simp is someone who's trying to replace goals. And I've been called that, and I've been called someone who's doing this for all the wrong reasons, and I've been called for someone who's trying to protect their brand, which is, yeah.
You know, I think, unfortunately for us, there are structures in place where certain people will only listen to men. Like, there are people out there that don't respect the opinions of women, and in that case, we need men to kind of tell these people, listen, your way of thinking is wrong. But on the flip side, it is also important to know that there shouldn't be men mansplaining gender-based violence to women.
Yeah.
Like that is the issue I see with men in gender-based violence, is when they tell women how they should feel.
Yeah.
And that is the issue I think most women have regarding men in gender-based violence activism. It's they kind of try to take over and lead the woman to where they think they should be, instead of listening to say, where do you want to be? Let me help take you there.
Yeah. I think I think we wouldn't be doing any of this at the rate at which we're doing it if we had bad intentions. I feel like we would have given up a long time ago. Like the insults we tolerate, very bad. I do feel that there's a lot of place for male activists to learn, especially. And I feel like what you said is true, like don't mansplain everything. Rather try to come from a place of understanding or trying to understand how women feel about being oppressed.
And listen to the people you're trying to help.
Exactly. I think that's the role of male activists. I am sorry for taking so long, but that was a very personal matter. So thank you so much.
Let's see
Robert
if
Downings.
James will be sending us the next one.
I do have the next one. Okay, so James sent me the next one. Don't look. Hey, go on. I have the question.
Oh, do you have the question? I was waiting for you to send it.
I have the question.
I was wondering why I don't have it.
Okay, so this question comes from totally not James.
That's totally not.
You are made the president of the country in 24 hours, for 24 hours. What's one current law in South Africa you would repeal? Can I take this?
Yes,
I would like to take it. So, there's currently a law called Innocence Until Proven Guilty. It's actually a rule, and I would kind of want to create an exemption at one specific crime called rape, right? And I specifically want to say rape because of the fundamental issues attached to it. And the exemption would be that the perpetrator has to prove that the rape didn't occur, instead of the complainant having to prove that the rape occurred. How do you feel about that? Like, I just feel like that's like the way forward in terms of solving rape in general.
Like, I think that would really go against all the principles of our law system, and
Obviously.
kind of begin something that we won't be able to see where this will go. I think instead of changing the principles of law, we should rather say that we want to allocate more time and effort into this, go into the specifics. Maybe change the laws on how you obtain or how you're allowed to obtain specific evidence, because in rape cases it is very difficult to obtain evidence unless the person went for a rape kit directly afterwards or in the next, I think, how many hours ever. So there should be more resources and more ways that you can find evidence, like develop that instead of trying to change something that our
But then
system is
Justin,
built on.
our president has been speaking about trying to invest more time into these cases. It has not worked. Like, clearly it has not worked. So I have a solution that might help. If needs be, trial it. But to go with your solution would kind of be like, we understand, so we're going to kind of stick to the same solution.
Okay, but trying to prove...
That's not working, by the way.
Trying to prove something didn't happen, I think, is harder than proving it did happen. Because proving something did happen, you have to prove one scenario. Trying to prove something didn't happen, you have to prove that any other scenario, basically, all the other factors didn't take place. So you have a lot more to prove something didn't happen than you have to prove something did happen.
How about, we all know that in criminal cases, we have a trial within a trial, which is like when they have to, for example, test the admissibility of evidence. How about we have a trial before a trial to determine the honors, meaning who has to prove what? Could that like be the middle or like a common ground? Just quickly. Yes or no?
I don't, like, it's a very difficult question. You can't really go into depth in it. It depends on what you want who to prove. Like, some things are just supposed to be proved by the person that did the crime or suspected of doing the crime.
Yeah.
But yes, it is a very difficult question. I get where you're coming from, but I think in the environment our law system is already in, which is a horrible state, to be honest, it is going to be very, very bad for the law system as a whole to introduce something like this.
Yeah, and if you didn't realize, we just gave you a whole teaser to upcoming episodes. We're going to receive another question from James, who... I just received it now. From totally not Lionel Messi, why don't more people stand up in activism?
Stand up in activism. What do you...
Why don't more people? Why aren't more people pro-activism? Why aren't they activists?
I think, like, I'll take this one first.
Yeah.
Like, we are in a society. We can agree to that. So there are a lot of social pressures out there.
Yeah.
Like, I feel being an activist is kind of swimming against the flow. Like, there's a flow in society that people tell you, this, you are a man, this is how you should feel, this is how you should act. And going against that flow is, I think, one of the hardest things you'll have to do to get started with. Like, that initial decision to go against the flow is going to be much harder than continuing with the flow. That's why the earlier I think you get into it, the easier it is for you, because that flow isn't that hard for you yet.
I would kind of like to say something totally different. I believe everyone is an activist of sort. If you decide to keep quiet, you're an activist for keeping quiet. If you decide to speak out, you're an activist for speaking out. That's my perspective. So in relation to why don't more people stand up in activism, I think people are standing up in activism. They just have different roles as to how they activize. That's my opinion. Next question. I am taking this one again. James, you love me.
Yes, sir.
On what ethical system should we base our lawmaking? This is very legalese, like. Okay, so on what legal or ethical system should we base our lawmaking? Should I take this one first?
Go for it.
I think we should tap into. James, like, do you understand that? Like, maybe I don't know what ethical systems are.
I'll maybe
Please, like, rescue me.
So I think we as a South African nation, and most of the world actually, to think about it, we are taught from a young age that we have rights.
Yeah.
But we forget, like in our LO subject, there was always two parts. You have rights and you have responsibilities. I think our law system should move away from we have rights to we have responsibilities.
Yes.
Because that many people don't realize my rights come with responsibilities. I have a right to freedom of speech, but if I use my speech as a racist to kind of take away someone else's rights, those rights don't count anymore, and people don't realize that. People say, I have rights to say what I want to, but you don't, because you have responsibilities too. So I feel we should kind of base our law system on the responsibilities we have towards the community,
Instead of human rights.
instead of focusing so hardly
That's like
on the
that's
rights.
a very negative way of looking at it. Like that places a negative obligation on people to not do something because they would be infringing on other people's rights. Like if we were to think about how you're saying it, like the constitution would be shaped like this. Everyone has the responsibility to not be or promote propaganda, right? Section 10 of the Constitution, I think. No, section, I don't know. But that's how the Constitution would be shaped up. It's a very negative duty placed upon someone. I think we can find a balance to that. Maybe making the Constitution more clear, or making our law making clearer, making our legislation clearer, meaning you place a positive, which is a right given to someone, and then a negative in how you are thinking about it, which is a responsibility.
But don't you think giving rights to people, or having it focused this hard on rights, is also placing a negative on people as well? Because you have the right to be treated as a human being, my action, my right to have freedom of speech is infringing on that right, so I actually don't have that right. It's already a negative thing because you have rights that my rights can't touch or affect.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. But I think it's a very difficult question because now you're looking at like what is right for the individual. Like for example, you think that it's correct to do it in this way, whereas I think that we should base our lawmaking not only on responsibility and accountability, what you're tapping into, but also like reciprocation. Like think about it.
But in that sense, like, don't you think that if we all came to a sense of that we have these responsibilities, it would automatically include rights? Because if my responsibility is to treat you like a human being, you already have the right to be treated as a human being.
Hey, you're making a very good point. My problem with that is we'll be going into a debate as to is a right more important than responsibility, vice versa. I don't want us to get to that. What I'm proposing is let's find a balance between the two, yeah, which is currently what we have. I just think that we need better implementation, except of course for that exemption I talked about. That needs to be addressed, that needs to be implemented right now. So I think we can end it there. I think we can end it there. But thank you. Thank you so much for all those questions. I think they were quite good, and it's something that we'll definitely ponder on. Researchers, you heard it. Creators, you heard it. James, you heard it. So thank you so much to each and one of you. This ends the submissions segment. Thank you so much, Justin.
Bye.
I appreciate you. I love you.
I don't feel the same way.
Hello everyone, people are both here, Groet and Amo. Thank you so much for watching the presidential address with Atang Swartbooi. Please do not forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. And tell your friends to do the same.